Professor Miller here. Today we're going to be talking about case theory. So, what is a case theory? Case theory is an integration of the facts surrounding the client and law relevant to the client's concerns that tells a persuasive story that achieves the client's goals. So, what are some of the goals of a case theory? Well, one primary goal of a case theory is to persuade. An effective case theory will include all three elements of Aristotle's modes of persuasion: logos, pathos, and ethos. Logos, the logic of your argument. An effective case theory will synthesize the law, the facts, and the client's goals into a storyline that encourages your audience to reach the conclusion you want them to reach. Pathos. Your logical argument will be much more persuasive if it's wrapped up with a good dose of emotion. This is where you want to really know and appeal to your audience. The way you present a case theory for a judge is going to be very different than the case theory you present to your mom when you're arguing for a new dog. Ethos. You want to build your credentials with your audience. Demonstrate why you are trustworthy and credible, and why they should believe your story over the story of your opponents. Another central goal of case theory is to develop a roadmap for your lawyering this semester. As you will see, case theory should be a central driver for the choices that you make this semester in clinic. Everything from interviewing to fact investigation and direct examination is guided by your case theory. So, how do you create a case theory? Well, we have 6 steps for you to take when drafting your case theories. 1 is to think about your narrative facts. I encourage you to revisit our readings for this week and also our video on narrative to refresh yourself on the central elements of narrative. These include characters, events, causation, normalization, master plots, and closure. When you're thinking about narrative facts for your case theory, some questions you want to be asking yourself are: who's your client? What do you like, or what are the likable and maybe the less likable traits about your client? What does she describe as a trouble that she's facing? What's the cause for that trouble? What other characters are involved in the trouble? What are their likable or less likable traits? Why should she get the closure or the relief that she's seeking? What stands in her way? What are the barriers and obstacles? What facts are favorable to your client, and what facts aren't so favorable to your client? Once you've gathered your facts, we move on to step 2 and construct a storyline. We want to be thinking about creating something that's both visually and emotionally compelling. Does this paint a clear picture for your audience? Does it draw on their emotion and get them rooting for your client? We also want to be thinking about whether or not it follows a familiar story arc. Is there a character, some sort of conflict, a spark or a journey that they take that brings them back to either their original steady state or creates a new, better steady state? What's the takeaway message that we're looking for? Third, we want to be thinking about our legal theory and the law. Does your case theory reference the governing law and include the necessary facts to prove up each element of the case? Normative theory. Here in clinic, we practice client-centered lawyering. So you want to be considering whether or not the case theory you are putting forth advances your client's goals and preferences. Does it tell her story the way she wants her story to be told? Then we put it all together. We consider whether or not the case theory is consistent. Are the facts consistent from your point of view as a lawyer? From the client's point of view? From the witness's point of view? Does it use strong evidence and explain away bad facts? Is it consistent with the law, with the client's goals? Does it provide insight into why things happened the way it did, or why it should happen the way you want it to happen? And is it emotionally compelling? Are we rooting for the client? Once you synthesize everything, you move on to editing. You edit, you edit, you edit, and you edit. So, what are some of the characteristics of a strong case theory? Well, first, it's consistent. It's consistent with the client's goals, the facts, and the applicable law. Next, it's credible. If it doesn't sound believable to you, it's not going to sound believable to anyone else. It's brief. Normally it's about 70 to 90 words. And you might be asking yourself, why so short? Well, this is intentional. It forces you to think critically about each and every word to promote the best storytelling. You also want your case theory to be easy to memorize, as you want it to serve as a working tool for every bit of your learning this semester. Next, a case theory is appropriate for your audience. The type of case theory you put forward might be different for a jury trial versus a bench trial. And you always want to be thinking about the legal case and the legal elements. And then lastly, it uses narrative form. It references or evokes a master plot, a phrase or theme. It highlights the good facts and downplays the bad facts, yet accounts for both. And it's emotionally appealing. Again, we want the audience to root for our client. Okay, so we're going to play around now with case theory. I'd like you to pause the video and read our sample case theory that a previous student has drafted. You're going to then think about whether or not the narrative elements are being used to communicate and persuade in this case theory. Consider how the storyline is, whether or not the law is reflected, and then consider whether normative theory is present or used effectively. So please pause your video and take a moment to read the sample case theory for Juliana Garcia and write down your thoughts on the questions posted on the screen. We'll be discussing your responses together in class. All right, we're back. So now we're going to look at a second version of this case theory and see how it improves upon the first and also identify some areas for improvement in the editing process. Here we have Juliana Garcia, a devoted and hardworking mother who seeks to maintain custody of her son, Mateo. Last year, Juliana kicked David Roberts, Mateo's father, out of their home. David had physically and verbally abused Juliana for many years, often in the presence of young Mateo. David has failed to provide Mateo with any financial support for the past year. It's in Mateo's best interest for the court to award sole physical and legal custody to his loving mother, Juliana, so she can continue to safeguard his well-being. This clocks in at 87 words. All right. So let's take a look again at the various steps for an effective case theory. It should include narrative facts, have a visually and emotionally compelling storyline, make reference to the legal theory and the law, have a strong normative theory, and then put it all together and synthesize it, and then edit. Okay, so what are the things that this case theory does? Well, it's good in that it paints a picture of who Juliana is. She's devoted and hardworking. She's a mother, a survivor. She's loving. She cares about her son. And we also learn something about David. Here he's depicted as violent and failing to provide for his son. There's a clear narrative arc in this case theory. We have a mother who suffers years of abuse. She's finally able to kick her abuser out of the home. And now she's able to care for her son and only wants to continue keeping him safe. The legal theory here in this case is clear. She's seeking sole physical and legal custody. And it alludes to some of the relevant factors. Here it alludes to the history of domestic violence, the lack of financial support from the father, the fact that she's a primary caretaker. All of these things are important for the court to consider when determining whether it's in the best interest for Mateo to live with Juliana or to live with David, and for them to have legal custody over him. There are some areas to improve for next time. It doesn't really seem to anticipate any of the counter arguments that David may have. And yes, you are going to be rooting for your client, but it's important that you're also looking for and identifying some of the weaknesses and the bad facts. Every case will have them. Now we go back and we edit and we edit and we edit. It's also important to remember that case theory is fluid. You're going to be adjusting your case theory this semester as you learn more. Your case theory, in turn, furthers your fact investigation and your research. So we have, for example, the initial client interview, where you're going to be gathering some facts. After that, you may be thinking about the facts and applying it to the law and starting to develop a theory for your case. This theory then is going to drive further interviews, further fact investigation, further legal research. And as you start to learn more, you may have to adjust your case theory in turn. And remember, we can't forget that our clients' goals may change or that the case theory will have to adjust. Thank you so much for listening to this video today, and a special shout out to Professor Liz Keys, Margaret Johnson, and Shanta Trivedi for their helpful teaching materials and the insights.